Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for this opportunity. And it's after a week, a very busy week in Brussels when we voted about CAP. Now we are all at home, so we suffer this situation, but the times is going on and it's necessary to implement things which we spoke about and what we voted about. And in agriculture, CAP policy, we all know that these topics about biodiversity and other things are very important, and it's necessary not only to speak about this, but also to offer practical solution. And I met with some of you also in past, and I really like this debate when we speak about possibilities, about good practices, and I think that sometimes I miss this when we get on the table proposals like biodiversity strategy. It's necessary to implement it. And now I think that we know that now these trialogues can start, and inside these trialogues it will be necessary to accept first this CAP policy on European level, and then accept strategic plans on national level and find these goals. And through this, I think this innovation, new way of producing what you are working on, this controlled environment, are one of the possibility. I think very important thing, and it is a part of also possibility that we get support for this innovation, digitalization, good use of resources. I think that we are in close to many these topics which are inside CAP. So as perhaps you know, I work also on this topic on smart villages, and this is how digital gap, to fulfill digital gap also in rural areas, and through such innovation things, I think that we can also go in this this direction. Less use of pesticides, other things. In many things we are connected with these possibilities you offer. So I will not waste your time. It's a pleasure that I can be co-host with you, and the floor give back to you, Tom, and I wish a good meeting.
Thank you so much, Frank. I mean, it's a real pleasure that we are reconvening again on topics which are all we all care for greatly. Just a brief introduction. FarmTech Society, who's co-hosting, is a very young business association located here in Brussels. I'm the Secretary General. We're basically a network of international experts, and what controlled environment and agriculture essentially is an emerging, sector in food production. We do not exclude protein production such as insects or fish in this CA terminology. Of course, it's still relatively unclear what it all means, and we are trying to establish this. We have three main tasks in our statutes for our members, and the first one is that we are zeroing on education and workforce development, which is in agriculture constantly a big topic. But we feel that, even when there is a knowledge transfer with a lot of advancement in technology and innovation, it becomes even more intricated and needs to be really pushed in order to make this a feasible solution. Secondly, we are engaged in also the development of standardization and sort of common practices, because with innovation is basically something that most people don't know or others don't know. So it is a kind of a freewheeling enterprise startup venue, and that has certain advantages, but the disadvantages come very quickly. That is that there needs to be sort of frameworks, understandings and standards to further the practice and also create a level playing field. That tops it off with our third pillar, which is engaged in policy development and advocacy work. We find that CEA is practically not well known outside of the small sector within the industry, or there's a lot of wrong information or a lot of missing information, I should say. So unfortunately, we had a interesting panelist from the WWF committed to this who bailed out 2 weeks ago. And with this, we would like to really see this as a beginning of probably a second step in the future, where we will enlarge the panel also to include a conservation stakeholder or the biodiversity specialist, because it's of course always interesting to bring these new topics in the discussion, but without having a proper representation of all stakeholders, it becomes a one-sided outcome. And we would like to really balance out as much as possible and to be agnostic to preferences, so that we have a very informed discussion, and that we can help policymakers really build their own understanding of what this is. So introducing also my co-moderators here from FarmTech Society is a Vice Chair, Tisha Livingston. She is a US-based Vice Chair from FarmTech Society, but she's also one of the leading market leaders in CEA in the US. And she can explain to us what CEA means in her book. And then we also have Stanislas Demeestere, who is our young legal counsel for the organization based here in Brussels. He has a degree from environmental law from the University of Edinburgh. Thanks again for everybody. Please feel free to put a question in the chat if you see fit, and also put links in the topics. And we hope this is going to be beneficial for all of us. And please, the floor is yours. Thank you. Maybe Tisha, you can talk to us about CEA and then introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Absolutely. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Tisha Livingston. When I think about CEA, it's controlled environment agriculture, and really it is at the foundation or the root of what we're trying to accomplish here with biodiversity. With CEA, what we try to do is we try to optimize plant growth in a natural way by completely controlling the environment. And we want to control those growing conditions. We want to be able to control the amount of light, the amount of nutrients, water, airspeed, airflow, and really kind of maximize the photosynthetic rate of the plants. With that, what we find is that we can grow 300 times more produce in the same footprint. I'm talking about lettuce and leafy greens, clearly anywhere from 50 to 300% depending on the crops. And we can do that in a sustainable way using 97% less water. And we also do that with 0 pesticides. We are able to accomplish all of those things, and this is not hypothetical or theoretical. I am the co-founder and president of an indoor vertical farming company here in the US called 80 Acres Farms, and I also run a technology company based out of the Netherlands called Infinite Acres, which develops technology that we're putting globally all over the world to be able to produce fresh, healthy produce right next to where people are. So from a CEA perspective, that's kind of my definition. What I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is let's introduce all of our panelists. And so it's, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but it was kind of the fun part of having the American introduce all of the European names. So I've been practicing, so please. The first is Ard van de Kreeke. Was I close? Van de Kreeke? Close?
Yeah, you're close. Not too bad.
So Art is the manager and owner of GrowX, which is one of the first vertical farms in the Netherlands. And he has been responsible for that farm since 2019. And prior to that, he was a very successful organic farmer, and he was directly marketing his produce there in the Netherlands. So Art, thank you so much for being part of it. Mateja, Kramar. She's a serial entrepreneur from Microsoft Europe, and she has over 30 years of experience. Prior to her current role with Microsoft, she was the guest lecturer at the ETH Zurich discussing entrepreneurship. And she was also the smart farming manager at the Autonomous Systems Lab at the Institute of Robotics and Intelligent Systems. Mateja has a background in marketing as well, so love that entrepreneurial spirit and that experience. Dr. Andrew Jenkins, that was an easy one, thank you, Andrew. He's a research fellow at TU Delft, so in my home base when we're not in the pandemic, I also live in Delft, so love it there, miss it. PhD at Queen's University Belfast with a focus on building integrated technical food systems. And the discussion was how to integrate technical food systems into the current infrastructure of cities, and if so, how effective is it? And in terms of circularity and sustainability, carbon footprint. So I can't wait to hear some of your thoughts on that. Then we have Nicole Thorpe, who is the director of Cultinova. I've had the opportunity to get to know Nicole pretty well on the FarmTech Society. She's creating digital solutions for efficient, transparent, and sustainable food production. Nicole has experience working in Europe, Asia, and the US, specialized in managing several publicly and privately funded R&D projects in the UK. Or she's also in the UK, lead of Crunch, an EU-funded sustainable cities project. So welcome, Nicole, and thank you. Lodewijk Kleijn is a partner at, thank you, I practiced that one a lot.
Very well, thank you.
Is a partner in Horizon 11, which is a company with the goal to make food supply chain healthier and more sustainable. Close to the Netherlands horticulture cluster, so he's in the Netherlands there. Lodewijk is also the founder of Polder Mines, pushing innovative sustainable technology from concept to early stage operational profit. And he is also the program director of TEDx of Amsterdam. So welcome, Lodewijk, and thank you for coming. And then Gijs Schilthuis. Gijs, did I do it right? Is that close? Okay. He's the Director General for Agriculture and Rural Development for the European Commission and Head of Unit of Policy Perspectives. And he is really at the forefront of the EU agricultural policy decision making. So really appreciate your time there. I think that'll make a big impact to this panel and discussion. So thank you, Gijs, for joining us. So that's all I have. I think we're going to turn it over to Stanislas.
Yeah, I will first kind of set up the discussion a bit, talking about the thread that we want to discuss, and then go into the first question. So currently Europe's agriculture is subject to a lot of challenges. So while trying to keep the sector profitable and competitive, we're also subject to regulation on greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity. Reaching those goals is paramount, but while doing so, we need to keep the sector alive, and that's one of the great challenges currently. One of the challenges therein is land use, land sparing and land sharing. And although CEA is still a niche sector, we believe that the potential in the question around land use, in the case for biodiversity protection, is not to be underestimated. So by freeing up land, CEA could alleviate the competitive pressure between land sparing and land sharing, creating space for both. That's basically the underlying idea of this discussion. Out of this discussion, we would like to have some new ideas about aligning maybe policy instruments that could not only save land overall, but also tap into the potential that CEA has in allowing for a whole new way of master planning rural areas, running operations which are both profitable and sustainable. With that, we would go to the first question. The EU aims to transform at least 30% of Europe's land into natural areas, with the aim to increase biodiversity. This approach in the Biodiversity Action Plan comes as all biodiversity increase goals in the past have been missed. The EU has decided to thread the same needle in trying to increase biodiversity, especially regarding trying to increase biodiversity on agricultural land. However, another course to run would be to focus on reducing land use and devoting the land that we save fully to environmental protection. With that comes the question, what are your experiences with biodiversity schemes in agriculture, and how do you think a land saving scheme could change the narrative? The first speaker would be Art.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. Well, of course, what for me is important, and I've been an organic farmer, so I know how it is to grow outside, to grow organic, to change from being a normal farmer to an organic farmer. And now we are the last year and a half, we are really focused on the CEA, on the vertical farming. I think, for me, it's been an experience the last year to see what the potential is, and especially working together closely with, for example, Wageningen and Delft and other universities, to also see what the future potential of the CEA is and of the vertical farming is. If we see what we can achieve on circularity, on efficiency, and on these kind of things, I think there's a huge potential to be given for the future for vertical farming. So I think it's an important aspect, especially in the whole concept of the EU and what the future of agriculture is going to be. I think CA vertical farming is going to be a big aspect of it. It's not going to change the world, and it's not going to replace agriculture at all. But I think it's an important aspect which sometimes is a bit forgotten and a bit underestimated, mainly because I think the last couple of years it's been everybody saw the potential, but it's always been looked at as it's too expensive, it's too far out, but it's not far out anymore. We are really on a tipping point. I had a meeting yesterday with people from Wageningen, and they said, hey, we really have to think that at the moment we are on a tipping point. The commercial value of vertical farming is changing from being unrealistic expensive and only there for the high-end herbs for restaurants or for the Michelin star chefs. And slowly we are getting down to a cost price where it's interesting to produce food on a commercial base and on a big scale base, with all the advantages that are there. So I think it's important to get this out, to talk about it, and to receive questions, and to let people know what the potential. Let people ask the questions. What is the potential? How do we look at it? How do we have to see it? And give it a place in the total spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So Andrew, what do you think that, like what Art said, what do you think that biodiversity would mean for yields? And can CEA really be a meaningful part of the food contribution? Do you think that you can have it with a solution for improving yields and thinking about the energy usage? Can that balance things out?
Still on mute.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, a 30% reduction in sort of agricultural land, which is effectively what we're talking about here, is you know, a significant amount of land to sort of give up. And you know, I'm talking you know, specifically about the UK where I live. You know, we currently import 50% of our food, so you know the European Union will be a net importer of food. So actually we're not just talking about that 30%, we're actually talking about a much greater area of land, you know, that needs to basically be freed up elsewhere as well. You know, and I think vertical farming is, you know, it definitely will form part of the solutions in the future. But I think, you know, if we're talking about areas of this magnitude, you know, we're talking about urban vertical farming, we're talking about peri-urban vertical farming, and we're talking about rural vertical farming as well, because, you know, if we're not vertical farming in rural areas, you know, there is no chance that we can possibly fit 30% of agricultural land within and around cities, you know, even through high intensity vertical farming methods. And, you know, vertical farming does, you know, a lot of things really, really well, you know, as has been mentioned, you know, reductions in pesticides and herbicides, the potential of shortening food supply chains, you know, there's energy savings there as well, and the potential reduced need for freezing and chilling and packaging or other sort of benefits that we can take into consideration through those shortened supply chains. But you mentioned energy. You know, the energy of vertical farming is its Achilles heel at the minute. You know, and I think we need to be honest with that, because if we aren't honest with the facts, then we can't move forward. You know, and I think it's really important to discuss that, because, you know, we are making marginal gains at the minute, and we can only continue to do that through you know, future research agendas, and the project that I'm involved in with at the minute, which is called Sky High, you know, a big part of that is looking at improving yields, but also decreasing energy use, and actually looking at how we integrate vertical farming within cities, both from an architectural perspective and, you know, a social and cultural perspective, but also how vertical farming can also leverage sort of waste flows in the city, particularly sort of heat and energy grids, to really lower the carbon footprint of vertical farming overall. You know, and I think, you know, I'm sort of seeing this topic that we're discussing now as agricultural offsetting, really. You know, we're moving agriculture from one place to another place, you know, and we have caused severe damage to our environmental services, ecosystem services over the past 200 years, you know, and we need to make big steps forward to actually give it some time to recover. You know, it needs sort of a good 10, 20 years to actually recover itself to be productive, not in terms of food, but actually in terms of ecosystem services. And I think vertical farming can be part of that answer, but at the minute there's still you know, a few question marks that need to be included in sort of future research agendas to achieve that.
If I can hook in a couple of items you mentioned, can I? Because it's very, we are in Amsterdam, and in Amsterdam, of course, everybody is looking at how does it look for a city. This morning I had a television recording here for a children's program, and they asked me, okay, what do we need on a footprint? And on one football field, and we are close to the Amsterdam Arena here, on one football field, we can print 4 times 50 gram of salad. So 4 times a week, 50 gram of salads for all the inhabitants of Amsterdam on one football field. So the production capacity of a vertical farming is huge for a city. The second part is we are with ASA working together on research here to get our nutrients. So all the nutrients we use in our farm, we get from the sewage sludge from the city of Amsterdam. It's a technology from the ESA. We are trying that together with Word from Wageningen and AMS Institute. We're trying the research, and that's really spectacular what the potential is. That means that all the nutrients we use are coming from a circular base. And what we also today here do in our farm in Amsterdam, that we, of course, energy consumption is a big issue, but 50% of the energy that we use is transferred into heat. That heat we store underground and we use to supply to our buildings in the neighborhood via WKL. So it's a couple of important things, and of course we are also in the Sky High program, like Andrew is, but I think there are already big steps being made in the short term. So there's some things going on today already. Yeah,
thank you very much. Andrew said something interesting, which is the idea, well, the possibility and maybe probability that we are moving or agriculture outside of the EU and actually exporting our agricultural production if we have to adhere to these regulations, etc. So that kind of poses the question: can we balance? Can we do the balancing act? And can CEA help with that? And for that, I'm going to Nicole, who has experience all over the world, I hear. So how do you see Europe's agriculture staying competitive at all? And considering the land questions, what's the role of CEA therein?
I think it's going to be one of the most imperative strategies for me was going to lie in cooperation and collaboration. I think that's the main trajectory that we have to follow. I see so many within the frame of my work with the FarmTech Society and the Standardization Committee, I see so many duplication of efforts all over the world. And I think collaboration amongst people who would normally in a normal playing field be competitors, you know, I think that's key. And for policies to enable that, that collaboration and the ease of standardization, I think that's something that will be a driver for the industry. But I'd just like to maybe come back to the first question, Stanislas, if I may, because I would just like to reiterate what the two speakers said before me. I think it's still a paradox to many, moving food production indoors and using energy to provide light. When sunlight's free, you have to power for heating, you have to expend power for heating and cooling systems, and as well as all those sensors. And I agree entirely that's not the silver bullet, but it's I still think it's one of the main jigsaw puzzles in building a resilient food system. And that's why I think in Europe we've got to leverage the fantastic knowledge that we have also, particularly in the Netherlands, you know, from the greenhouse production and also, you know, more and more so in the vertical farming industry. And we've got to really leverage that and cooperate with the US, for example, where there's a lot of capital, but maybe less, don't take this the wrong way, Tisha, now, but maybe less of the experience in terms of greenhouse growing, for example. Because when I speak about controlled environment agriculture, I tend to extend this to greenhouse production as well. So not just completely daylight independent systems, but greenhouse-based systems as well. So I think this technology transfer, or rather knowledge transfer in the frame of cooperation and engagement, and this is why I view the work that the FarmTech Society does as so extremely important, because we kind of bridge the gap between the continents. Even, you know, we even work in South Africa, so it's tremendously important to keep the conversation going and to communicate and collaborate. That's for me the silver bullet.
And I'm not offended in the least. Comment about growers, because, you know, that was really one of the decision-making points that we had in the balance between going to high-tech greenhouses versus indoor. The population is aging that has the knowledge to be able to grow produce, particularly in the US, and we have so many varying climates, and the temperature, and with the climate change, you're seeing these swings in temperature that really make it challenging for growers. Even in the Netherlands, I think you guys would agree that we've really been struggling, particularly over the past several years, with the intense heat in the summertime, and how do you cool your greenhouse, and you're losing crops, and there's a lot more pressure, and it's a whole different level of knowledge and sophistication that if you really want to scale food production globally, and you really want to make an impact, and you don't want to lose every, you know, third crop that you're growing, that you need to be able to control against all of these swings and these challenges that we have in agriculture right now. And so I'm not offended in the least, and I think that that's part of CEA. And so, you know, and that thank you, Nicole, that kind of goes and flows right into the next question. What I wanted to ask of Mateja, because with Microsoft and thinking about CEA and thinking about farming practices, how can we leverage, and how can we hit our biodiversity goals? How can we help one another through collaboration between conventional growing, indoor farming, and also think about greenhouses? How can we collect data? How can we collaborate so that we're more successful in the future?
Thank you, Tisha. So thank you for having me here. Regarding the experience that I had last 2 to 3 years working on the smart farming project, which was starting with the drones and collecting data on the ground and the soil, and with drones, I realized that what is the most effective way we need use cases for all sides. We need use cases to prove ourselves to regulations, to governments. We need use case, or a couple of use cases to prove farmers to jump to another, whatever are the new solutions there, because we know farmers' average age is 60 and above at the moment. So they just say, why would I change? I have a couple of years more. On the other hand, any connection with digitalization of agriculture and collecting data is attracting new generations to join and become farmers. So we are here as Microsoft offering and trying to foster this kind of use cases and these use models, which are also on the third part, so to the end user, the consumers, should be something like we have also here a project that we work here in Switzerland is underground farming. It's also controllable environment, showing that it's the same taste and it could be even healthier. So no pesticides, no environmental issues that could be damaging the crops. I think what we realized is what we had now, it was one part was controlled environment in sense of laboratories, in sense of ETH and research labs, and also applied science universities. But we need to go directly find the influencer farmers who are able to be this bridge and make a lot of promotion about it and prove that it works. On one side with farmers who are in a way influencers to do this and say it's good, it's successful, we have much better results and yields. And Microsoft is always here to help. Microsoft is also always offering technologies, offering, of course, more than happy to offer the cloud and even helping to bring data analytics into it. But just theory and doing somewhere in the research fields somewhere is not enough. We need to work in parallel with the society to let them know what's happening, to invite them into these farms to see how it looks like, to taste the food. And this is the first step. So it's going in a very entrepreneurial way, I would say, proof of concept that works, and then get slowly bridge by bridge and cross to the new models, which are, I think, is inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We now go to Lodewijk. Basically the same beginning question of what is the role that CSI can have, but also, do you believe that the shift to land sparing can come and CEA can be invested in on a grander scale, considering the trust needed in technological innovation on a grand scale? So it kind of builds upon what Mateja said as well.
Absolutely. I believe that to an extent, it's a bit of a chicken and egg question. So can the technology be delivered to achieve the skill required to regenerate land and recreate biodiversity? On the flip side, if the technology is there a market, are there investors? So if I look at that, I think that if we want that moonshot proposition of having controlled environment agriculture replace not all, but a significant part of open field farming to generate the land sparing we're talking about, then you need the commercial value chain all the way from investors to consumers. In short, you need the political, social stakeholders engaged. You need a climate where this technology can thrive. Can we achieve the technological demands? What Art was just speaking about, how GrowX is evolving, how it's now turning into a circular proposition as well. I believe any technological challenge, as Mateja was saying as well, can be solved nowadays. If there's enough money, enough engagement, enough people, enough collaboration, then we can do anything technologically. We bring AI in, we bring data in, and as we grow and it becomes an exponential improvement. So technology we can achieve. Can we get investors along? There was an interesting announcement on the 21st that one of the key CEA financiers in States, Equilibrium Capital, you may know them, Tisha, they opened up their investment portfolio in a partnership with Credit Suisse Asset Management, which means that institutional investors are coming into the CEE arena, which is really, really good, because that means that trillions become available, which also means that investors are accepting that investments in CEA are sufficiently de-risked, which wasn't the case a few years ago. And that will be, it's the case today for greenhouses. I think that art will see that it will become the case more and more for vertical farming as well. So you've got the investors. Then the next step is, do you have the technology companies that are willing to create the startups and scale-ups to bring the technology we need? Well, I think we see plenty of that, definitely in Holland. We see it in Israel. Tisha, I don't know what your experience in the US is, but if I look at the market, there's tremendous numbers of people coming in. You need growers. And this goes back to the previous question. I think where the growers come in, you've got a fantastic opportunity to align the technology play. So the young startup, smart engineers working in the startups, and the younger generations of traditional farming families who might see an alternative opportunity to develop controlled environment agriculture in their backyard, literally, very literally, because they are close to cities, they are close to consumers. And then finally, you need markets, you need consumers. And the consumers, we'd love to think that all consumers are green thinking and focused on sustainability. In the end, they're not. So they're still buying at traditional retailers. The early adopters come into, they'll look at certificates of origin, they'll look at sustainability. But to get the mass consumer along, he will be voting with their wallet. And then you go back to the chicken and egg question. If technology advances rapidly enough, you can go down the productivity yield curve fast enough to make produce available, as Mastronardi has been doing in the States for 40 years, at a decent price. And it's safe, it's resilient, it's traceable. So, and it's traceable two ways. The farmer can see what he can't today, where he sells his food at what price, taking away a bit of the massive power that retailers in Europe have over growers and food producers. And the other way around, the consumer can see almost what plant the produce he's buying and eating and serving his family came from. And then that brings me to, I'm sorry, this is a bit long-winded, but it brings me to a third part. What you need as well is and this is what we're really talking about today, I think, is a policy environment where all these stakeholders can thrive. And to achieve that, you need a balance supporting traditional open field agriculture and modern vertical agriculture on the one side. What you also need is a system where food coming out of controlled environment agriculture production systems gets the same labeling, or gets a different but equally attractive labeling that consumers can recognize. And Thomas I know Thomas is fighting for this anyway. I mean, why can we call, and in the US it's different, but why can we call food from open field farming organic, and why can't we do that if it doesn't come from soil? When there's no pesticides, a perfectly circular model as Art is proposing, why on earth can't we have a label that consumers recognize and appreciate? So I think we can do it, but we need all stakeholders engaged, and that's what we're working towards. And FarmTech Society is doing a wonderful job promoting that.
Well, Lodewijk, thank you. In the US, I would say that you would be my perfect wingman, because you're hitting all of those points that typically that I would want to hit. And so, I think that we do have the technology. I'm a technology provider for indoor farming, so of course I believe in it. We certainly are seeing the consumers. I'm seeing the investors jump in, institutionals, like you said. And the thing with the institutional investors is they're setting aside funds for sustainability and really focused on SDG goals and double, bottom line impact. So it's not just about the dollars and cents, but we have to be creating CEA solutions that have that profitability that is affordable and accessible to all, which I think that we're getting closer and closer to. So, Gijs, you're up, man. So how do we get the policy? What do you think about that? So we've run through, we've got the investors, we've got the consumers. I'm telling you, the consumers will do it. This is a line behind the consumers. I wouldn't start a company that I didn't think that it's, you have to be able to sell a product somebody wants to buy. They want pesticide free, they want sustainability, they want great flavor, they want healthy nutrition, and they want shelf life. They don't want stuff shipped all over the world. They want stuff that's produced locally that's going to last on their counter in their refrigerator. So now what about policy? Do you think that the EU is ready to recognize and help indoor farming, help CEA kind of make an impact? Because I feel like we've got all our ducks in a row and we're ready to go. So it's up to you.
Very good. Well, thanks a lot. It's extremely interesting. I will already acknowledge that I'm a bit of a newcomer to this world. You all seem to be knowledgeable and extremely specialized. So it's great for me to listen to all of this. And if I hear from you how good it is, I'd like to walk around the block and buy the stuff. But apparently that's not quite possible yet. So there must be some issues still to be tackled. I don't know if I have all the answers to your questions. I think I should start, and this is no surprise, and this was also in your invitation. I mean, we're working from the perspective of a Green Deal. We talked about the biodiversity strategy. We also have a farm to fork strategy that really tries to align food and agriculture policy to Green Deal objectives, to sustainability objectives. And that's the angle of work also on the Common Agricultural Policy. I work in DG AGRI on the Common Agricultural Policy. Which is, of course, if you wish, when I listen to your conversation, extremely traditional, but also probably for good reasons. It's more than just about food. It's also about the countryside. It's really also about preserving livelihoods. It's also about landscape and about certain agricultural traditions, if you wish. Of course, we have the geographical indications as prime example of that. So we come from I suppose the agricultural policy comes from this tradition and is now confronted with a big sustainability challenge. And in the farm to fork strategy, we're trying to move the whole system forward, not incrementally, but rather more with a bit more of a push. We really need to have a change, and my executive vice president, Mr. Timmermans, calls it a transformational change. So I think what we're trying to do in terms of answers, and on the one hand, focus on traditional forms of agriculture where we want to be more friendly to nature. Organic is an example, but we are basically looking for a lot of what they call agroecological principles to apply to farming more generally. On the other hand, we also focus a lot on research and innovation and on more innovative forms of agriculture. And why is that? It is precisely, I think, the challenge that you've put on the table for today. We need to produce enough food to feed Europe. And I think the COVID crisis, both in the US, but also here, I think a lot of us have for the first time queued maybe outside of the supermarket to buy our food. This never happened before, since at least not in many parts of Europe since wartime. And so when I hear one of your speakers say the biodiversity strategy objectives means we need to import food, then I can assure you that this is not the objective. This is not the objective of the European Commission policies. So that means we need technology, to be able to, we need technology either to make sure that organic farming or traditional farming, land-based farming, whatever you want to call it, is more productive, as well as respects the environmental boundaries, or we need more intensive forms like controlled environment farming. As one example. So, and we do support that with plenty of research projects. I think I should mention that right from the start. So already under the current research program run by the EU, we have a number of projects that focus on urban farming, on technology development, and also in the future research framework, we focus on that. So I think that's extremely important to help the sector along. So that angle, I think, is key to focus on, to make sure that the technology meets the sustainability challenges, because the sustainability is, of course, not just environment, it's also income for farmers. The economic picture needs to be okay. We need to have this social aspect covered, but also increasingly important. I should say also the farm to fork strategy is strongly influenced from the health department of the EU. So the health aspect is important. What about nutrition? I think if I talk to people on the street, talk to my friends, they often ask questions about, yeah, what about the nutritional value? I don't know the answer to that. You may know it. I'm not a specialist here. But if that question comes from people, I think it's an important issue to raise. And I would like to actually, there's plenty of more to say, but I would like to answer with a question. The point being made is that biodiversity, we need more area for that, right? And so we need to have less area for farming, so we need to make it more intensive. So, but the products that are being mentioned are from the horticultural sector, and horticulture is of course important, but doesn't use that much land. So would it really make a difference in terms of the land use of agriculture when we move horticulture into controlled environment, or would you would we still have a lot of land that is necessary for traditional crop farming or animal grazing? So how does it really, is the proposition that we would really be able to save all this land by controlled environment agriculture, is that really the case in view of the products you're envisaging? Thanks.
Well, I think that's a fair question, and so I don't know, Andrew, if you have an answer right away. But from my perspective, I think that we are a new industry, and while it's really easy to grow leafy green crops like lettuce and herbs, we are continuing to develop the technology to be able to and will be growing. We do grow tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, all of those things as well indoors, and we're continuing to work on root crops and soft fruits and berries. And so as our technology improves and we learn more about these crops and think about the genetics of those crops and how we can get the right varietals to grow indoors, I think the amount and the number of crops that we can grow in a controlled environment continues to increase. And so then we can continue to make that impact. And I think that from my perspective, something is better than nothing. And if we can make an impact in part of the food supply and increase the land usage for more biodiversity and being able to get some of this farmland back to nature, something is better than nothing at this point, because otherwise I think that, you know, we're gonna go right into our next discussion, which is talking about if we do make these choices in biodiversity where we follow the you know, that we see the increased pressure on the land use, and we, regardless of the opportunity or however we're going to choose to approach getting biodiversity, I think the main acting force here is climate change. And what we're seeing is that the future yield production in the EU continues to go down because the crops and the yields and the pest pressure are continuing to reduce how much food we can grow within the hectares that are assigned for food growth and food production in the EU. So in addition to that, we're proposing 25% of future lands to be organic. I can tell you, and there's plenty of scientific proof that organic farming does not yield the same as conventional farming. So you're going to have less food production there. And that considering that and the increased stress on the land to be able to produce food, what could technology offer? You mentioned that we need to think about technology. So I'd really like to pose a question of what can technology offer to help us with food production while we're reducing the footprint for traditional agriculture. Maybe Art, if you don't mind, I'd start with you, because you have the experience, you've moved from organic to indoor. Do you think that this is a trend that we're going to be able to really adopt? Kind of like Gijs said, is this something that we're going to really adopt and make an impact on? What is your findings?
Yeah, I think the impact of if you look at normal farming and the agriculture farm, of course, there's also an intensity. The production is growing there. If you see what we have in Holland, an average farmer in Holland and his production capacity is compared to an average farmer anywhere in the world, we are on a very high yield. So in that sense, I think there's a lot going to change. But going back to Gijs, to his remarks on what's the difference and what's the impact of CEA or vertical farming. Of course, it's small. We still grow mainly the leafy greens, the salads, but salads are grown outside. So it's not all the horticulture things. I mean, the salads we eat in Holland, the salads, especially in Scandinavia, even in the EU, most of it is all coming from Spain, Italy, France, all growing outside. So definitely you do replace a lot of acres from outside, which can be replaced by other biodiversity things. Also, as Tisha said, vertical farms definitely will develop into growing more different things, even potatoes. Also in the Sky High program, there's also part of the program is developing potato growing in vertical farms. So on that side, there's also a potential. I think the health issue is very important. I think people have to change the menu. One of the big things in food for the future, if you look at I mean, we have to change our habits of eating. And I think, of course, if you look at land use, I think there's no discussion that meat is definitely more than 50% of the land use that we do. Either it's grass or maize or grain or corn, or we grow for animal feed, then we put it into the animals, looking at how many grass there is for the cows. That's the major impact. If you look into the impact for land use, of course, changing the menu from less meat, other type of protein, that will be a much bigger effect than growing the salads indoor. But I think it's a combination. One of the major things of salads that I learned in the last year is that the health aspects, and I think Tisha can confirm, I mean, there are really big studies going on that you can raise vitamin with 25% in average salads by just changing your light spectrum. I mean, there's a huge potential in that side of the maze, so that we, with this little bit of salad that we grow, if people start eating it, you can create more vitamins and more nutrients in that part. So I think there will, vertical farming will play a big role. That the local grown, healthy, vitamin, nutrient things, that can be produced locally. But of course, the rest of the diet should also change, and that will make probably an even bigger impact on the biodiversity. But it doesn't mean that vertical farming doesn't have an important role. But it's not major. Meat is much bigger impact on biodiversity than a salad is. But I do think that the impact of salad can be big also.
Yeah, thank you very much, Art.
Sorry, can I just like one more thing? Because I am passionate about the health and nutrition. What Art is saying, sorry guys, but it is absolutely true, because when you think about in nature, there are natural genetics in the plant that create phytochemicals. They create, you know, the vitamins and nutrients that we consume that help us with anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, and just good health and nutrition. Well, you can see that instantaneously in a moment in nature. You can see that out in the open field if the environment is perfect to stress the plant for those things. But in an indoor farm, we can do it every time. And so when you think about Eastern medicine and you think about medicinals for, you know, health and wellness, and why it's really hard for Western medicine to prescribe a diet and prescribe what you should eat for the right health and nutrition, it's because it's unpredictable. Because you get it sometimes and sometimes you don't. And that salad that you're getting on shelf in retail, sometimes it's nutritious, sometimes it's not as nutritious. It depends on age, depends on the environmental conditions. We can stress the crop and provide the same nutrition, and we can enhance the nutrition every time. And so when we think about health and wellness and what we're feeding our constituents and our consumers, I mean, the indoor farming, I think the impact to health and wellness is probably far bigger than any other impact. Okay, sorry, Stanislas. I'm so excited. That's so true, and I think it's something that people don't think about. But health and wellness, it is critical for people.
That's definitely true, and it's glad to see people passionate about their sector. I would like to bring the conversation back on something that Gijs touched upon, albeit maybe between the lines, which is the issue of essentially calorie production, right? If we want to be amongst the big players, let's say, there is some potential for CEA to not only be about leafy greens and let's call it vitamin production, but also really have a say and in you know, producing calories. And for that, mainly we're looking into hybrid solutions where we breed indoors to then plant outdoors, which makes the whole process much more efficient. Considering the challenges mentioned earlier, especially climate change, which will make a part of Europe's farmland, you know, much less productive, can this be a feasible and especially a scalable solution? And what can the role of CEA and technology be there? And I'm posing the question to Andrew first. You're on mute, I'm afraid.
Sorry, too polite. So sorry, just repeat the question again.
So in which way is CEA able to sort of head the calorie question rather than just producing leafy greens and really having an impact on the question on how to feed Europe? And I'm taking into that hybrid solutions where you can grow indoors, plant outdoors, which kind of, you know, opens up the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm not a grower. I'm sort of from an architectural and sort of urban planning background. But, you know, I would say that from what I know about vertical farming is that, you know, about 80 to 85% of startups sort of fail within the first 18 months. And that comes down to sort of obviously making sure that you can sell what you produce, and that, you know, and bringing those capital costs down and energy use down is part of that sort of sustainable economic model for vertical farming and CEA. You know, and I think at this stage, you know, if we're talking about calorific value, you know, if these farms are sort of failing when they're producing relatively high cost crops, you know, quite expensive crops, you know, then obviously a move towards things, you know, like potatoes and wheat at the minute from an economic perspective is relatively difficult. But that's not to say that that can't form, you know, part of the food chain in the future. And I think it goes back to, you know, what Gijs was asking, you know, about land use in Europe. You know, it depends on what the current land segmentation is with regards to leafy greens and soft fruits and those things that can be easily moved towards vertical farming, and what is that as an overall percentage of land use. You know, if that was, say, 15%, you know, then we need another 15% to free up this land for biodiversity, and then we really need to consider how we make vertical farming sort of a more surefire bet for investors to make sure that they can make money and sort of contribute to the food chain in a productive way, both for sort of high cost crops as well as low cost crops as well. So you know, I don't think we're there just yet, you know, in all honesty, because we are still struggling with those initial capital costs, you know, and running costs as well. But those marginal gains, you know, I think will move us towards those systems in the future, as well as hybridized systems as well. You know, I think they will play a really strong part, because, you know, one of my things about vertical farming is that it's sort of an invisible industry, really. And you know, if you take it within you know, the context of sort of urban agriculture, which is my background, you know, actually a lot of the social and cultural benefits of urban agriculture is that it's visible, you know, that people can engage with it and understand that, you know, we are biotic beings and that we require access to ecosystem services. So I think, you know, hybridized systems, whilst they can be more beneficial in terms of energy efficiency, I think they can play a really strong role in the kind of delivering future healthy, you know, happy and healthy and more engaging cities in the future. And I think sort of hiding it away, you know, in a box, whilst it might, you know, sort of tend more towards the food security side of things, you know, I think it can play a bigger role within kind of future urban development to actually improve people's lives. And I think that's quite an interesting discussion to have as well.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree. we had the opportunity to put a module growing tomatoes in front of the Guggenheim Museum last winter on Fifth Avenue in New York. And there was a huge, tremendous impact in just the discussion around food and food production, because people aren't connected to the food and where it comes from, but they want to be. And so understanding tomato and tomato production, and that you can do it anywhere, and it can be a meaningful impact. And yeah, I agree with you, Andrew, very much. So Nicole, I'd like to jump to you related to this as well. So what about the Internet of Things? We hear about, you know, there's so much technology out there. How do you think that IoT can help contribute to improving on the use of land? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm being polite as well, like Andrew. I think it goes back to the old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So I think making things measurable is key. And sensors in CA capture data on all sorts of things besides plant and environmental parameters. So you capture data on inputs, usage, outputs, processes, and you allow for, we mentioned this earlier, for maximum transparency, traceability, compliance, and ultimately trust. So the challenge is, of course, a lack of existing standards, and as I mentioned previously, the fragmented efforts globally. And so this is why we're working towards standards, and sustainability metrics is another point. You know, we can measure things, but what do we measure against? And I think this is part of this nascent or fledgling industry that we're finding ourselves in. It's, you know, we don't have the defined metrics. We don't have the standards that we have in manufacturing, for example. So this is where we have to play a lot of catch up. And the work that we do with FarmTech Society and projects like the Sky High project that was mentioned earlier, they're doing another great piece of work in the jigsaw, and completing the jigsaw puzzle. So in terms of land use and biodiversity, and I think to get back to your original question, Tisha, IoT can help to capture the data. And as we mentioned earlier, tech isn't the problem. Technology, you know, is there. We don't have to worry about that. It's more the definition of the, as I said, the standardized metrics that are needed to monitor the effectiveness of the ecosystem services that were mentioned by Andrew. And I also see a very, very huge, big potential in benchmarking the biodiversity performance amongst growers. So, or even carbon credit accounting, you know, how efficient am I in my carbon? Am I working towards zero carbon? And, you know, can I offset it and get into this carbon credit accounting, which seems to be really taking off, and I think it's only going to be a matter of time till it really reaches our industry. So I think it also offers the opportunity to really democratize the data to inform and empower growers, citizens, and foremostly the consumer. I think even though we've got the consumer on the radar, like I said, Tisha, I think the consumer doesn't have CA on the radar quite yet. So I feel that there is a lot of education outreach still to be done. Excuse me. Telephoning in the background. Lots of education outreach work still to be done in order to really inform the consumer of the benefits of produce grown under CEA. I witnessed this firsthand when I was at a trade fair in Germany last year. Yeah, when we're still allowed to travel, and it was the I think it's the world's largest, or at least Europe's largest fair for agricultural technologies. It's not the Green Tech, it was the Agritechnica in Germany. It's a biannual event. And it was, the motto was innovative agriculture, yet we were the only ones advertising or exhibiting solutions for controlled environment agriculture. So we had a grow container there, kitted out with our sensors and lighting control. And people were just really interested and amazed, but kind of, and weirdly actually equated controlled environment growing to organic growing. They kind of said, oh yeah, it must be clean. So, and it must be like organic, even though it wasn't grown in soil. So I found it really interesting to speak to sort of the normal consumer out there and see that they're interested, but they don't really know what it is. And I think this is where technology can play a big part, capturing data. Also, in terms of building up investor confidence. Andrew mentioned the de-risking investment approach. I think that's an extremely important part in moving this industry forward and strengthening it and making it part of a resilient food system in the city. And I think we also need to move it. I'm sort of rambling on a little bit. It's going a little bit beyond your question now, but I still think it's an important point, is that we need to move the capital away from venture capital and kind of towards more patient capital that doesn't put so much pressure on startups. As Andy mentioned, a lot of them unfortunately don't make it because of the high capex and loads and loads of other factors that come into play there. But I think investing with more patient capital is going to be key.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Was someone saying something? No. Yeah, let's go to Mateja with a question on technology. Let's go further into this. We're talking on the importance of rolling out this technology large scale, and the technology is there, but considering what Nicole just mentioned, issues such as funding, and we need to move away from initial investors, etc. What's the potential for this rolling out on the large scale? And also, is there a need or a wish to regulate this more and to have this at least recognized in policy? Could that help? How do we get the limelight on implementing this technology?
Yes, definitely it's on regulation side. But as I said before, what is experienced now last 2-3 years is that we didn't come to that to be able to scale. So we can have everything ready. We applied sensors to the farms, to the ground, trying to influence other farmers. It's definitely there is a need of a push from the government side. So farmers needs to be pushed, like here in Switzerland, we have now initiative coming out for applying 50% or less pesticides on the farms. Otherwise, they will not get incentives. So we're trying to, I was trying to, together with the same initiatives, to let them know that if they start today, they will be ready when the initiative is here, when the law is here to apply. The technology is absolutely no problem, but is, of course, it's not a charity business, Microsoft. It will not invest something extra. It does invest and tries a lot on a sustainability level, supporting level on all that. But we as Microsoft, we cannot force from any side. The theory was also, if we convinced consumers to buy food, whatever is this, is more organic, which is now absolutely too expensive. If it's from the vertical farms, if it's from any controlled environment, from underground farming, then anyway, the farmers will have no choice. They will have to change because the consumer will prefer that. At the moment, even in Switzerland, less than 3% are buying organic because it's too expensive. Plus, research shows that even in organic, there are the same 22 pesticides because the water is circulating. So they don't trust the label anymore. What would be the trust? Of course, I would go what we do now, try to measure, but we have to know that any machine learning or any technology applied to become to certain data, let's say about water, about anything that would show that this is a good way to go, it's again time. We, for example, we flew over with drones and had ground data for over a year. Then we have this data collected. You need scientists who are a bridge between the data and and farmers and farming, so agronomy or whatever is this. So we don't have that. We have only islands of multidisciplinary. Who will translate this data into something useful? So I'm afraid if we wait too long on something like that to just one of these solutions, it will be 2025, 2030. I would go rather to really go find places, find farmers and apply and start somewhere, and all in parallel. Talk about it to the consumer. This is good, this is why it's good. Consumer is selfish as the farmer is selfish. They need to see the return on investment, the consumers on food, on their health, building their up immune system. COVID now is excellent to people a little bit care more about health and what kind of engine they put in their vehicles, in their bodies. So this is a good timing to promote a healthy part of that, so the consumers will be happy. Technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, as we know, and better. So all the sensors are getting more and more affordable. This is not a problem. But to scale it, we need players to be interested. We are now in Switzerland working with corporates. They are still on the stage of nodding and sugarcoating and greenwashing, to be honest. In reality, it's happening all about good PR. So they change a kind of packaging and recycle packaging, and they do the whole marketing about it, claiming they are the most sustainable, which if you go a little bit deeper and provoke them to question, they disappear. So I'm now at the moment helping the biggest corporates in Switzerland, like Nestlé, Migros, Coop, Fenaco, and similar, to become sustainable. And the more you try, even gently, to come and help them become more sustainable, offer them data collection to prove to the shareholders that they are doing the best way, they're going 2 steps behind, and all of a sudden you got no reply on email. So I would go to those who are, we say in the marketing language, more innovative, or inventors, like we have farmers. Promote them big time, expose them. If we have anybody from the political side or European Union who says and goes and is able to go to on the stage, I think we have to go from all sides. It's not worth to put all the investments and energy and time into one field, not in the farmer, not in consumer, not in technology. From all sides, it has to happen.
Mateja, thank you so much. And when we think about all of these options, we're talking a lot about agriculture and the farmer. Lodewijk, I'd like to come back to you a little bit. So we've talked about growing, we've talked about conserving and figuring out the land share situation. And we hear Gijs loud and clear that we really need to be able to preserve some of the land, to be able to bring it back to nature. So what other things can we do? What are some of the other options? We've really beat up agriculture and farm production. So what other options are out there? How else can we help achieve these goals?
Well, I think that what Mateja just said is really inspiring, because that's exactly where a lot of the benefits are going to come from. The fact that the opportunities offered by technology are almost limitless, and that's really, really good. And at the same time, and as she stated as well, the appetite for true disruption is far too low. So there's established players in the market that definitely benefit from the status quo. The big food manufacturers, they benefit from the status quo. Large open field farmers, they benefit from the status quo and the subsidies that go with that. Retailers in particular benefit from the status quo. So I think as we move with controlled environment agriculture to a far more controllable, as it states, environment, and almost and scalability, which sounds a bit like a production system, you also get the market power that comes with having the ownership of the productive resources. It's ancient as economics. And then obviously, just as an aside note, if you talk about food as a production system, produce being produced, literally, that has a bit of a negative connotation maybe. You say, well, open field farming, organic farming clearly is nutritious. Gijs was asking the question, is CAA food as nutritious as open field farming food? Well, of course it is. You know, go back to when Locke said that we wouldn't have enough food somewhere in the 12th century. We came up with irrigation. Well, irrigation is controlled environment agriculture. You're controlling the environment. The only thing is that if you're in a greenhouse or in a vertical farm, you can take that to a totally different level. But you're still using the power of nature, which I think, you know, Tisha, I think that's one of the things that Priva's talking about as well, using the power of nature. You're not changing nature. It's not genetic engineering. It's just creating an environment where nature can perfectly function. Once you've got that, you can talk, and this is something that, for example, Rex found, the seed manufacturer, not really manufacturer, but seed creators are really good at, is determining what the consumer wants and modifying seeds exactly for that purpose. Now, if you do that correctly, you can, and this is the other things we are talking about, you can, for example, start to erode the power of the retailer. Because the retailer, why on earth would you sell tomatoes for 80 cents a kilo in a shop? It just doesn't make sense. It's like cheap meat. It can't be good. Consumers, I was in Davos this year, I was speaking to farmers associations from India and Thailand, and they said, well, it's really funny. You know, consumers in Europe are spending only 8 to 10% of their income on fresh produce. Whereas in Thailand and India, they're spending up to 30, 40% of their income. It's the world turned upside down. So if we can change the power of the retailers, which we can do once we can control the production environment and produce exactly what the consumer wants, and if we can do that economically and scalably and repeatably and close to where the consumer is, then we can change the market mechanics, the market economics. I believe that's really where there's a big contribution to be made.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now I lastly would like to come back to Gijs for a minute with maybe a bit of a tricky question. Is the EU being realistic in the goals that it has set for itself in biodiversity protection, especially considering that they also want 25% of farmland to be farmed organically, 20% natural areas, and all of that in a climate that is changing? And do you think, after what you've heard today, maybe that there maybe is need for a large step in recognition of CEA by the EU, or maybe more the potential? We've heard a lot about the chicken and the egg today, which I think is a great metaphor for the issues that CEA is facing today. Do you think that maybe the institutions are in a position to take the first step and to kind of alleviate the playing field that CEA is working with?
Thanks, and thanks for asking a difficult question. That's bringing it all together is the challenge, but also the fun of working for the EU. On your question whether it is not too ambitious, I would say, do we have a choice? If you look at the biodiversity challenge, if you look at the climate change challenge that we're facing, I think we need to move. And what we are trying to do with climate change is to move to carbon neutrality in 2050. Now we're trying to up our ambition for 2030 as a staging point, and based on impact assessment and analysis, so based on data. So we are really trying to do that. The same for biodiversity. Obviously, there will be a big UN summit in 2021, and our pitch is that we really need to make a serious step. So I don't think we have a choice. The challenge for all of us is to make sure that we push for this transformational change. Like Lodewijk has just said, you really need to the appetite for the real transformation is not there, and I think that is a challenge for policymakers to do that. So we think the 30% for biodiversity and also the other objective that we've set in the Green Deal are ambitious but also realistic. I think we can get there. We believe we can get there, but we need all the tools we can get. We need you guys, so to say. If I can talk to all of you who are on this panel, who are engaged with this technology, because we need technologies like these also to get there. And maybe just a couple of points to respond also to earlier things, if I may, just briefly. I realize the time is running out, but in terms of the question on organic and this not being so if it's not grown on soil, it's not organic. I very much recognize that. We just had a big political debate about the rules surrounding organic. The European Parliament and the Council made their decisions about a year and a half ago, and this was not included. So the soil, it being grown on soil, remained an important aspect of those definitions. So yeah, that is also then where I think the political environment makes its decisions. However, I think what is really important is that we are now, as part of this Farm to Fork strategy, moving towards a framework for sustainable food labeling. This is, we're going to come with front of pack nutrition labeling to help consumers make sustainable choices. We're working on animal welfare labeling, origin labeling also, but the overarching thing is what we have in mind for 2024, which is a framework for sustainable food labeling. And of course, this needs to be measured. So that's why it's not done tomorrow, but why it's only 2024, because we need to be able to measure what we do. And I think your farms, your controlled environment products need to be seen in that context as well, because indeed you would score high on the different aspects of sustainability, if I understand the conversation and the example and the stories that you tell today. All right, so that would also be a great vehicle for transmitting and for placing your sector, I think, in the market of in the marketplace, so to say. And I was just reflecting a bit, just taking a step back. I was thinking, we're talking about, acceptance of controlled environment agriculture. It's inside, it's with funny lights. But I was thinking, people accept slaughterhouses, so why should we, maybe we should take a step back and think, if the story is good, it would work, wouldn't it? And a final pitch I would like to make. We are doing a foresight study on the farmer of the future. This is going to come out in December, looking at all kinds of different farmers, and urban farming is also part of that narrative. We're doing it together with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, also there to try to say, okay, this is a schedule. This is aiming for 2040, so in about 20 years' time. What would farmers look like then? What type of farmers do we have? What role do they play? How can we also help farmers get there? What skills do they need? What technology do they need? So I think that might also be an interesting a piece of work for future discussions in this area. And thanks a lot for this interesting conversation today.
Beautiful, beautiful. We're running out of time, just on time. And I do want to say that I just picked up a book this morning which said there's no life without biodiversity. And I'm going to really tear into it, and I'm extremely pleased with our conversation so far. Of course, we could probably go on for quite some time, and I'm aiming to make a round 2 out of this and invite some additional panelists. We will come back to you with some dates. Mr. Frank Bogovic, thank you so much for co-hosting this. Tisha, Stanislas, thank you so much for your co-moderating. Thank you so much, your panelists. It's been absolutely fascinating with what we have just brought together in an hour and a half, and I wish you a healthy and safe week, and looking forward to reconvene in the future at a shorter, at some notice. Thank you, and thank you so much.